The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the suburban morning as Detective Morrison approached Marcus Chen's front door. Behind her bedroom curtains, Karen Westfield smiled with satisfaction until she noticed the second patrol car pulling into her own driveway. The pool removal that had started as a simple home renovation was about to expose a 20-year-old secret that would destroy everything she'd built. Sometimes, the person who calls the police is the one who should be running. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the gaping hole where his backyard pool had been just hours earlier. The demolition crew had finished their work at dawn, leaving behind only disturbed earth and the promise of a new garden his wife, Sarah, had dreamed of for years. The August heat was already oppressive at 8 a.m., and Marcus felt a surge of relief, knowing they'd never again have to deal with the constant maintenance, the chemical balancing, or the insurance liability of the aging pool. "Honey, the contractor said they'll start filling it in tomorrow," Sarah called from the kitchen window, her voice carrying the excitement of someone finally seeing a long-held vision come to life. "I can't wait to plant those rose bushes we picked out." Marcus smiled and waved back, but his attention was caught by movement in the house next door. Through the gap in the fence, he could see Karen Westfield standing at her kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, her face animated with what looked like indignation. Even from 50 feet away, he could see the sharp gestures she was making with her free hand. He'd lived next to Karen for 5 years now, and in that time, she'd managed to find fault with everything from the height of his grass to the color of his mailbox. The woman seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of complaints about neighborhood violations, real or imagined. Marcus had learned to simply smile and nod whenever she cornered him about some perceived infraction, but something about her body language this morning suggested she was escalating beyond her usual passive-aggressive comments. "Sarah," he called toward the house, "come look at this." His wife emerged from the kitchen, still holding a coffee mug, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. At 38, Sarah Chen maintained the graceful poise of someone who'd learned to navigate life's complications with quiet strength. She followed Marcus's gaze toward Karen's window and immediately understood his concern. "She's been watching the construction since 5 this morning," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of weary familiarity. "I saw her out there with binoculars when I got up to make coffee." "Binoculars?" Marcus shook his head. "What does she think we're doing? Building a missile silo?" Before Sarah could respond, they heard the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming in their front driveway. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Unexpected visitors on a Tuesday morning usually meant problems. They walked around to the front of their modest 2-story home to find a black SUV parked behind Sarah's Honda. And emerging from it was a woman in a navy blue uniform that immediately commanded attention. Detective Lisa Morrison was in her mid-40s, with short-cropped gray hair and the kind of alert, assessing gaze that came from 20 years of sorting truth from lies. She approached the Chens with measured steps, her badge clearly visible on her chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen?" she asked, her voice professional but not unkind. "I'm Detective Morrison with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm here about a report we received regarding construction activities on your property." Marcus felt Sarah's hand find his, her grip tight with sudden anxiety. "Construction activities," he repeated. "You mean the pool removal?" "That's correct," Detective Morrison said, pulling out a small notebook. "We received a call this morning alleging that you may have violated several municipal codes during the demolition process." The caller also suggested there might be environmental concerns. environmental concerns. Sarah's voice rose slightly. We hired a licensed contractor. Everything was done by the book. Detective Morrison nodded, but her expression remained neutral. I'm sure it was, ma'am. But when we receive complaints about potential violations, we're required to investigate. The caller mentioned concerns about soil contamination, improper disposal of pool chemicals, and failure to obtain proper permits. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. And who exactly made this complaint? I can't reveal that information, sir. But I can tell you that the caller claimed to have documentation supporting their allegations. Through the corner of his eye, Marcus saw movement at Karen's front window. She was still there, still watching, and now she was no longer even pretending to be subtle about it. The pieces clicked together in his mind like a puzzle solving itself. Detective, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled, we have all our permits. We have receipts for proper chemical disposal. We hired Morrison Environmental Services to handle the hazardous materials. They're certified by the state. Detective Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Morrison Environmental Services. Morrison Environmental. That's interesting. Is there a problem with that company? Marcus asked. No, sir. It's just that they're considered the gold standard for this type of work. Very thorough, very by the books. She paused, studying both of them. Mind if I take a look at the worksite and your documentation? Of course, Sarah said immediately. Anything you need to see. As they walked toward the backyard, Marcus caught sight of Karen emerging from her house. She was dressed in a pristine white blouse and navy slacks, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who believed themselves to be on the right side of justice. Detective Morrison. Karen called out, her voice carrying clearly across both yards. I'm so glad you're here. I'm the one who called about this situation. Detective Morrison stopped and turned, her expression carefully neutral. Ms. Westfield. Karen Westfield. I've been a resident of this neighborhood for 15 years, and I've never seen such a blatant disregard for proper procedures. Karen's voice had taken on the tone of someone delivering a well-rehearsed speech. They started that demolition work without proper notice to adjacent property owners. They've been disposing of chemicals improperly. And I have reason to believe they don't have the correct permits for this type of construction. Marcus felt his patience finally snap. Karen, we sent you a notice about the pool removal 3 weeks ago. It's sitting in your mailbox right now because you refused to accept it. That's not true, Karen said, her voice rising. I never received any notice. Actually, Mrs. Westfield, Detective Morrison interjected. Refusing to accept certified mail doesn't invalidate proper notice. The Postal Service records show the attempt was made. Karen's face flushed, but she pressed on. Regardless, there are environmental concerns here. That pool has been there for decades. There's no telling what kind of contamination might be in that soil. This could affect the groundwater for the entire neighborhood. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady but firm. Karen, our contractor, tested the soil before beginning work. Everything came back clean. We have the lab reports. Lab reports can be faked, Karen said dismissively. I've seen it happen. Detective Morrison held up a hand. Let's all take a step back here. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, can you show me your documentation? And Ms. Westfield, can you be more specific about your concerns? For the next 30 minutes, Detective Morrison reviewed every piece of paperwork Sarah and Marcus had collected. Permits from the city, environmental clearances, contractor licenses, insurance certificates, soil test results, and hazardous material disposal receipts. Each document was in order, each signature properly notarized, each fee properly paid. Meanwhile, Karen stood nearby, offering a running commentary about how documents could be forged, how contractors cut corners, how the city permit office was notoriously lax in their oversight. With each passing minute, her accusations became more sweeping and less specific. Finally, Detective Morrison closed the folder and turned to Karen. "Ms. Westfield, I've reviewed all the documentation. Everything appears to be in perfect order. The contractors they used are fully licensed and bonded. The soil tests show no contamination. All permits were properly obtained and are current." Karen's face had grown progressively redder during the investigation. "But that doesn't mean, actually, it does mean exactly that," Detective Morrison said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "It means that you've wasted police resources on a false complaint. It means that you've harassed your neighbors based on unfounded accusations. And it means that I'm going to have to ask you some questions about why you made this report." The confidence that had carried Karen through the morning began to visibly drain from her face. I was just being a concerned citizen." "Concerned citizens don't make false reports to law enforcement," Detective Morrison said. "Concerned citizens don't refuse to accept legal notices and then claim they were never sent. Concerned citizens don't stand in their yards with binoculars surveilling their neighbors' lawful activities." Marcus watched as Karen's composure crumbled. The woman who had spent the morning positioning herself as the neighborhood's defender was suddenly looking around as if searching for an escape route. "Detective," Sarah said quietly, "there's something else you should know. This isn't the first time Karen has mad." Inspector Davies arrived with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years uncovering what people preferred to keep hidden. A compact man in his 50s, with weathered hands and sharp eyes, he carried a tablet and a toolkit that suggested he'd seen every possible building violation the human imagination could devise. "What do we have here?" he asked Detective Morrison, glancing down at Karen, who remained huddled against the fence. "Possible unpermitted construction," Morrison replied. "The property owner has admitted to basement work without permits. Given her pattern of harassing neighbors to deflect attention from her own activities, I suspect there's more to it." Davies nodded grimly. "How long has she lived here?" 15 years. "And no permits for basement work in 15 years. Davies pulled up records on his tablet, scrolling through years of data. "That's unusual. Most people do small projects over time, but there's nothing here. No permits, no inspections, no variance requests. It's like she's been completely off the grid for construction activities." Karen looked up from her hands, her face streaked with tears and mascara. "It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. I just needed more space. I just needed somewhere." "Somewhere? For what?" Detective Morrison asked. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Storage. I needed storage space." Davies and Morrison exchanged glances. After 3 decades of combined experience, they both recognized the sound of someone telling a partial truth. "Ms. Westfield," Davies said, "I'm going to need to see this basement. And I'm going to need to see any other work you've done on the property." "You can't just search my house," Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can," Davies replied, matter-of-factly. "Once you've admitted to construction, I have the authority to inspect for safety violations. If there are structural issues, they could affect neighboring properties. Marcus and Sarah watched from their yard as Karen's face went through another series of emotions. The woman who had spent the morning righteously demanding investigations was now facing the very scrutiny she'd been trying to avoid. "Fine," Karen whispered. "But it's not what you think." "What do we think?" Detective Morrison asked. Karen struggled to her feet, using the fence for support. "You think I'm some kind of criminal? You think I'm hiding something terrible? Are you?" The question hung in the air as Karen led them toward her house. Her property was immaculate, perfectly trimmed hedges, precisely edged walkways, not a single leaf out of place. It looked like the home of someone who needed to control every detail of their environment. "I bought this house 15 years ago," Karen said as they approached her front door. "It was perfect, except for one thing. No basement. No storage. And I collect things." She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The interior was as precisely maintained as the exterior, but something felt off. The furniture was positioned with mathematical precision, every surface cleared of clutter, every decorative item placed with the exactitude of a museum display. "Where's the basement access?" Davies asked. Karen hesitated. "Through the kitchen." They followed her through a living room that looked like it had never been lived in, past a dining room with a table set for company that would never come, into a kitchen that sparkled with the kind of cleanliness that suggested obsessive attention to detail. "There," Karen said, pointing to what looked like a pantry door. Davies opened it and immediately stepped back. Instead of shelves of food, there was a staircase leading down into darkness. But it wasn't the stairs that made him pause, it was the sound. A low, constant humming that suggested electrical equipment running continuously. "Ms. Westfield," he said slowly, "what exactly is down there?" "I told you. Storage. Storage that requires that much electricity." Karen's breathing became rapid again. I have climate control. For preservation." Detective Morrison moved closer to the basement entrance. "Preservation of what?" "Things. Just ... things." Davies descended the first few steps, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. What he saw made him stop completely. "Detective Morrison," he called up, his voice tight with concern. "You need to see this." Morrison joined him on the stairs, and together they stared into what should have been a simple basement but was instead something that defied immediate categorization. The space had been completely transformed into a series of interconnected rooms, each one climate-controlled, each one filled with floor-to-ceiling shelving, and each one containing— "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "What is it?" Sarah called from upstairs, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Davies and Morrison climbed back up, both of them looking pale. "Ms. Westfield," Morrison said, her voice now carrying the weight of official authority, "I need you to explain to me what you've built down there. And I need you to explain it right now." Karen's composure finally shattered completely. "I'm a collector," she said, her voice rising to near. "I collect things. That's not illegal." "Collecting isn't illegal." "What kind of things?" Davies asked. "Everything," Karen said, tears streaming down her face. "Newspapers, magazines, books, documents, photographs, records, files, boxes, containers, furniture, appliances, clothes, toys, electronics, ... Her voice became a rapid-fire litany of items, each word tumbling over the next. "How much?" Morrison asked. "How much, what? How much stuff is down there?" Karen looked around wildly, as if the answer might be written on her perfectly clean walls. "I don't know. I stopped counting years ago." Davies pulled out his phone and activated the flashlight app, descending the stairs again. This time he took photos, and what they revealed made the scope of Karen's collecting clear. The basement wasn't just full, it was packed from floor to ceiling with items organized in a system that only she could understand. Narrow pathways wound between towering stacks of possessions, creating a maze that extended far beyond what should have been possible in the original footprint of the house. "Ms. Westfield," Davies called up. "How far does this extend?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, how far under the neighborhood does this go?" The question was met with silence. Davies continued his exploration, following the pathways deeper into the underground complex. What he found made him immediately return to the surface. "Detective," he said urgently, "we have a serious problem. This isn't just hoarding. This is illegal excavation. She's dug out at least 3 times the original basement space. These tunnels extend under the street, possibly under other properties." Morrison turned to Karen, her expression now deadly serious. "Is that true?" Karen nodded miserably. "I needed more space. I ran out of room. So you dug under your neighbor's properties without permission?" "I was careful. I used proper supports. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing." Davies's voice rose. "Lady, you've created a potential sinkhole under an entire city block. You've undermined the structural integrity of multiple properties. You've created a fire hazard, a collapse risk, and God knows what other safety violations." The implications began to sink in for everyone present. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that their pool removal might have been sitting over one of Karen's unauthorized tunnels. Sarah grabbed his arm, her face pale with understanding. "Karen," Morrison said slowly, "is that why you've been making all these complaints about your neighbors? To keep people from digging, from doing construction work that might discover your tunnels?" Karen's nod was barely perceptible. "Every time someone wanted to put in a fence, or plant a tree, or remove a pool, you filed complaints to stop them." Another nod. "For 15 years, you've been harassing an entire neighborhood to cover up the fact that you've been illegally excavating under their properties." "I wasn't hurting anyone," Karen whispered. "I was just trying to preserve things. Someone has. To preserve things, someone has to keep track of everything." Davies was back on his phone, this time calling for backup. "I need structural engineers down here. I need the gas company to check their lines. I need someone from the water department. And I need someone to start evacuating the adjacent properties until we can assess the stability of this entire area." The words hit Marcus and Sarah like a physical blow. Evacuate their home, the home they'd just spent their savings to improve. "Wait," Marcus said. "What does this mean for us?" "It means," Davies said grimly, "that your neighbor has potentially compromised the structural integrity of your foundation, your utility lines, and your property value. It means that every home on this block may need to be inspected before anyone can feel safe living here." Karen sank into a kitchen chair, her perfectly maintained facade completely gone. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I just needed space. I just needed somewhere to keep everything safe." "Safe from what?" Morrison asked. "From being lost. From being thrown away. From being forgotten." Karen's voice took on the tone of someone explaining something that should be obvious. People throw away important things. They get rid of history. They don't understand that everything matters, that everything needs to be preserved. Morrison studied Karen's face, recognizing the signs of someone whose relationship with reality had become seriously distorted. "Karen, how much stuff do you estimate is down there?" I don't know enough to matter. Davies returned from another quick survey of the bee.